Welcome to the webinar. I'm Fred Cohen, and this is a Fearless Security webinar. And we're going to talk today about technical security architecture, a continuation of our previous talks in this area, that we're going to focus today on life cycles and context. The outline of the presentation. This is a sub-diagram you see here of the larger diagram, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, but this is the focus that we're looking at right now is technical security architecture. So, we can't gather and use all the personal information. This is what some people say, necessary in order to deal with life cycles and context. And for example, in order to do this job properly, sometimes we need to know about people's children, for example, to manage their insurance. But my children are none of your business. And another example is pregnancy. You have no right, to know whether I'm pregnant. That's sort of true, but if you're going to be working in a workplace that potentially has hazardous chemicals, then the business has to know the information necessary to keep you safe and to make sure that your future children are safe. So another counter argument to this whole notion of context, who, what, where, why, when, and how people access is that this is the internet age. So people can access anything from any time, from anywhere, and they ask, don't you get it? And then they'll tell me you can't get workers to work when you want, where you want. That's just not how the world is anymore. But I just don't buy into that. I think that's what we'll call fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think you can, and you should, if and when it's appropriate. If you want your children covered by health insurance, you're going to need to provide the names and information on those children so that the company can pay the health insurance bills and make sure that things are properly processed. And if you want the company to intervene on your behalf, instead of dealing directly with the insurance companies, which is awfully painful a lot of the time for health insurance, then you're going to have to let the company know enough to be able to do that. We need to plan and keep you and your baby safe. And, if you want to work as a teller in my bank, if I had a bank, you're going to need to be at the bank. So you can be a teller in the bank. You can't be a teller in the bank from afar. But it's all really about the risks here. Do you want your nuclear power plant run from the beach? Do you want somebody from the beach who steals my pad computer and when I'm running something in your nuclear power plant to be able to change the settings? I don't think so. Should your financial transactions come from anywhere in the world when you're not there? That's a little bit trickier, right? So, if I'm traveling in Zimbabwe, I want to be able to do financial transactions from Zimbabwe. But if I'm not there, I probably don't want somebody else acting on my behalf. So somehow you need to bring these things in and do it in a reasonable way. And so the question is, how do you do this? And this is how we do it. In terms of life cycles, we use life cycles in a wide variety of business decisions, including information protection, right? So, for example, we create small startups and support, their internal mechanisms while they're being formed, funded in initial operation. But then we transition to separate the IT when the risks aggregate above threshold. So that's an example of a business life cycle. And we deal with the business in different ways at different times. So we have to keep track of where things are. Another example is, we require defined maturity by the time a system is in operation. So we need to track the operational situation with systems so that we're certain that we've achieved that level of maturity by the time we turn it on and let the world use it. We don't want systems operating not in that circumstance. Another example is the issue of context, right? Context is a core part of internal protection architecture for most enterprises. Again, this is who, what, where, when, why, how, right? So we have lots of different internal aspects that use this. For example, we encrypt stored sensitive information in servers and desktops everywhere. But in the restricted zone of our zoned architecture, or in non-connected storage, which is to say, disks sitting in a safe at controlled sites with strong physical security, we don't necessarily encrypt it. It's not necessary there. And in fact, we're concerned about being able to recover it with forensic techniques. If it's encrypted, it's a big problem. But if we have a backup copy that's stored somewhere physically secure, it gives us the potential to recover regardless of what happens to the keys. Another example is physical separation that we require between systems operating in different areas of our internal architecture. And this includes a variety of things like wiring, colors, labeling, signs, markings, and so forth. There are all sorts of things that we do based on where something is. So, this is what we do in simple terms. And I'm going to talk now about how others can do it in the same fearless sort of approach. To do this, we apply our standard of practice. A standard of practice is not a standard. It's not just something you follow, not a bunch of rules. It's not an ISO standard or something like that. But what it is a set of reasonable and prudent practices. And you can think about reasonable and prudent as meeting the requirements of diligence, and things that aren't reasonable and prudent as being negligent. But just because we think these things are reasonable and prudent in different situations doesn't mean they're the only such practices. And they don't always apply. So you still need to use judgment, and part of being reasonable and prudent is using judgment by people that know what they're doing. It's also open source, so anybody can go and look at the standard of practice. I'm just going to take you there. You go to the all.net website, click on protection, and you can see the diagram that we have. For example, for context, there's context right there, time, location, purpose, behavior, identity, method, and so forth. It's the clickable diagram. And over here on the left, you'll see standards of practice. And if you click for open link in new tab, then a new tab will open, and that'll give you the list of the elements of the architecture. And I'm just going to drill down into the life cycles element of the architecture to show you how this works. Generally, you'll have a set of options. You'll have a decision. That's a set of criteria that you can use to pick which of the options are appropriate to your case. And you have the basis. And the basis includes definitions and the reasons and rationale behind the various alternatives and decisions. And so you can see, for example, for disposition, in the case of migration, after it's migrated, you might have a good reason to move on. So, and again, anybody can see it. But we use the standard of practice to help our experts ask reasonably comprehensive sets of questions, codify the responses consistently and in a defined language so that we're not sort of making up words as we go along, which information protection has a great tendency to do. We like to guide the decisions using the predefined bases that are built in, but also we identify variances so that when there's something that's unusual or different, we don't just throw it out, we think about it. And when it works, we use it. When it doesn't, we adapt it. So if there's a one-off situation where there's something strange and special, we'll just adapt to that particular circumstance. But if it's something we think is going to recur, then what we do is we try and update the standard of practice. And we've been doing this for many years. And we have peer review in the community. And of course, it's available for anybody to look at. So we welcome your review as well at any time. So I want to focus in a little bit on life cycles. I'm just going to pop up life cycles in the tool that we use to do this interactively. This is the life cycle decision that we use in our particular circumstance. And but this is the aspects to consider. And what this particular decision is based on risk and the type of life cycle. So for high risk or high consequence situations, for people, we use this set of different elements of people life cycles, and we try to track them and make decisions including those elements. But if it's a low consequence situation, we don't use the same thing. We might use education, training, hiring information, facts about whether somebody's been demoted, suspended, resigned, terminated, retired, and look for disgruntled employees and ex-employees. And we track those elements when the consequences are low enough. And so what we do is characterize what enterprises do up in the as-is area. And then depending on what study we're doing with them, we might look at Let's see, we can look at the gap analysis or a desired future state or a transition plan and so forth. So that's just how we undertake to do that. So based on consequence levels, we use subsets of these elements of life cycles. Each aspect is considered across the entire architecture. So once you've decided to deal with this set of life cycle issues, everywhere you're going to deal with a system, you're going to have to cope with these aspects of that system, right? So, for example, low consequence content controls are typically only applied considering, and here we go, content. This is not low consequence here, but if it was low consequences, you only consider transmission, storage, backup, restoration, migration, transfer, legal hold, and destruction. And really, in order to get a full sense of this, you need to read the details. And as I said, you just go to the website and you can pick them up. But here's an example. People or conception is typically a private matter, but healthcare programs have to reflect the proper status of the mother in order to ensure that the medical care and job assignments are proper for the status of the individual. Typically, women of childbearing age are restricted from certain roles for liability and health reasons. And of course, these issues have to be handled by information systems so that the management of operations is efficient and effective. But those systems, of course, have to be properly protected from disclosure because it's nobody else's business. The only person, if anybody, whose business it is the person making the decision where these things are factors, and hopefully the computers and the workflow system take care of the details so people don't have to know. Of course, if you want them to know, you're welcome to tell them. In other words, and without limit, the workflow for job assignments have to control for health and safety. But the actual status has to be protected. So there's this set of different factors that you have to cope with. So that's the end of that portion of today's presentation. We're going to take questions in a second, but there certainly are a lot of things to consider once you start to look at this across the entire enterprise. And we're, of course, just getting started. So next month, we're going to be talking about process and data state. And I'm just going to use the system here to give you the preview of it. Process and data state, that's over here. Here's process. It's about deterrence, prevention, detection, reaction, and adaptation. And the data state is about data at rest, in use, and in motion. And I'm going to turn off the recording and thank you for attending and take your questions.